Hello, my dear sleepy listener. Welcome to Sleepy Crown, where history's quiet tales gently carry you into dreamland. Tonight, we embark on a peaceful journey through the extraordinary life of Princess Diana, a woman whose warmth, compassion, and humanity touched millions of hearts across the world and forever changed the face of the British royal family. We'll softly explore her transformation from a shy kindergarten teacher to the most photographed woman on earth, her fairy tale wedding that captivated billions, her groundbreaking humanitarian work, and the personal struggles she faced behind palace walls. Before you drift away into peaceful slumber, I have a small request. If you're enjoying this gentle journey through history, please take a moment to like this video. It truly helps us reach more dreamers like you. And if you feel comfortable, I'd absolutely love to hear from you in the comments below. Tell me, what aspect of Princess Diana's life inspires you most? Was it her charity work, her role as a mother, or her courage to speak her truth? Don't be shy. Our Sleepy Crown family is warm and welcoming, and I read every single comment. And of course, subscribe to keep these soothing historical tales coming your way. So cozy up, close your eyes, let your breathing slow, and allow the gentle story of Diana, Princess of Wales, to carry you softly toward restful sleep. If you're new here, welcome to the Sleepy Crown family. Diana, later known as Diana, Princess of Wales, began her life on a warm summer day. Far from the glare of cameras and the weight of royal expectations, she entered the world on July the 1st, 1961, at Park House, a 10-bedroom residence on the Sandringham estate in Norfolk, England. The estate itself belonged to Queen Elizabeth II, but Park House was leased to Diana's parents as a grace and favour home, owing to their close connection with the royal family. Even from her very first breath, Diana's life was intertwined with royalty, though no one could have predicted just how deeply that connection would grow. Diana Frances Spencer was the fourth of 5 children born to Viscount and Viscountess Althorp. Her father, Edward John Spencer, who would later become the 8th Earl Spencer, was a nobleman with deep aristocratic roots, stretching back centuries. Her mother, Frances Spencer, was the daughter of the 4th Baron Fermoy, and she too came from a family well acquainted with the corridors of royal life. In fact, Diana's maternal grandmother, Ruth Fermoy, was a lady-in-waiting and close confidant to Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. This meant that from the very beginning, the Spencer family moved in circles adjacent to the throne. Diana's christening took place at the Church of St. Mary Magdalene in Sandringham, just a short walk from Park House. The ceremony was attended by family and close friends, and it was there, cradled in fine lace and surrounded by tradition, that she was given the names Diana Frances. The name Diana, chosen by her mother, carried with it a sense of classical grace. It was the name of the Roman goddess of the hunt, known for her independence and strength. It was a name that, in time, would prove strangely prophetic. Diana's early childhood unfolded in the peaceful surroundings of Park House. The estate was vast and beautiful, with sprawling lawns, ancient trees, and a swimming pool where the Spencer children spent countless hours during the warmer months. Diana was a lively child, full of energy and curiosity. She had 2 older sisters, Sarah and Jane, and a younger brother, Charles, who would later become the 9th Earl Spencer. There had been another sibling too, a son named John, who was born in 1960, but lived only 10 hours. His death cast a shadow over the family, particularly over Diana's mother, who carried the grief of that loss, even as she welcomed Diana into the world a year later. For the first few years of her life, Diana's world was safe, predictable, and filled with the simple joys of childhood. She played in the gardens, learned to ride horses, and accompanied her family to church on Sundays. The Spencer children were raised with a sense of duty and tradition, as was expected of families of their standing. They were taught manners, discipline, and respect for their heritage, but they were also given freedom to explore, to laugh, and to be children. Diana was particularly close to her younger brother Charles. The two shared a special bond, often playing together and supporting one another through the challenges that lay ahead. Diana had a nurturing quality even as a child. She would comfort Charles when he was upset, care for her dolls with tenderness, and show a natural empathy toward others. Those who knew her during these early years remember her as a sweet, gentle girl with a ready smile and a kind heart. But beneath the surface of this idyllic childhood, tension was quietly building within the Spencer household. Diana's parents, though outwardly maintaining appearances, were growing increasingly distant from one another. Frances Spencer, a spirited and vivacious woman, found herself feeling constrained by the expectations of aristocratic life. She longed for something more than garden parties and formal dinners. Edward Spencer, on the other hand, was a man deeply rooted in tradition, someone who valued duty and lineage above personal fulfillment. The differences between them, though subtle at first, began to widen into a chasm that would eventually tear the family apart. Diana, still too young to fully understand the complexities of adult relationships, sensed that something was wrong. She noticed the silences between her parents, the way her mother's laughter seemed to fade, and the way her father grew more withdrawn. Children have an intuitive sense for these things, and Diana, sensitive by nature, felt the shift in her home even if she couldn't articulate it. And then, when Diana was just 6 years old, the fragile structure of her world came crashing down. In 1967, Frances Spencer left Park House. She left her husband, her children, and the life she had known for nearly 15 years. The reasons were complicated, deeply personal, and painful. Frances had fallen in love with another man, Peter Shand Kidd, a wealthy heir whom she had met socially. The affair became known, and in the rigid social structure of British aristocracy, such things were not easily forgiven. A bitter separation followed, and eventually a divorce, a scandalous event in a time and class where divorce was still considered deeply shameful. Diana was devastated. One day her mother was there, tucking her into bed and reading her stories, and the next, she was gone. Diana and her siblings remained at Park House with their father, and the absence of their mother left a wound that would never fully heal. For Diana, the pain was particularly acute. She adored her mother and couldn't understand why she had left. In her child's mind, she wondered if she had done something wrong, if she had somehow failed to be good enough to make her mother stay. The custody battle that followed was brutal and public. Both parents fought for the children, but in the end, the court sided with Edward Spencer. Diana and her siblings would remain with their father, and Frances was granted only limited visitation rights. The decision was influenced in part by the testimony of Diana's grandmother, Ruth Fermoy, who sided with her son-in-law rather than her own daughter. It was a betrayal that Frances never forgave, and it added another layer of pain to an already tragic situation. Diana's world, once stable and secure, now felt uncertain and fragile. She attended a local day school, Sillfield School in King's Lynn, where she tried to blend in with the other children and pretend that everything was normal. But at home, the atmosphere was heavy with loss. Her father did his best to care for his children, but he was a reserved man, not naturally given to displays of affection. He hired nannies and governesses to help manage the household, and life went on. But the warmth and joy that had once filled Park House seemed diminished. Diana coped with her grief in the way many children do. She internalized it. She became quieter, more withdrawn. She threw herself into caring for her younger brother and sought comfort in small rituals and routines. She loved animals, particularly her guinea pig, Peanuts, and found solace in spending time with him. She also developed a deep love for ballet and dreamed of becoming a dancer, though her height would eventually make that dream impossible. Still, dance gave her an outlet for her emotions, a way to express what she couldn't put into words. When Diana was 9 years old, she was sent away to boarding school. Riddlesworth Hall, located in Norfolk, was a traditional preparatory school for girls. It was a significant step, and for Diana, it meant yet another separation, this time from the familiar surroundings of Park House and the comfort of her siblings. Boarding school was a rite of passage for children of her class, but that didn't make it any easier. At Riddlesworth, Diana was an average student academically, but she excelled in other areas. She was named the school's most helpful girl, a title that reflected her kind and considerate nature. She looked after younger students, helped with tasks around the school, and was well liked by her peers. She wasn't the brightest in the classroom, and she struggled with some subjects, but she had qualities that transcended academic achievement: warmth, empathy, and a genuine concern for others. After Riddlesworth, Diana moved on to West Heath Girls' School in Kent, another boarding school where she continued her education. Again, she was not a standout student in terms of grades, but she won awards for her service to others and for her compassionate nature. She volunteered to visit elderly residents at a nearby care home, sitting with them, talking to them, and bringing light into their days. It was here, during these quiet visits, that Diana began to discover a sense of purpose. She realized that she had a gift for connecting with people, for making them feel seen and valued. But Diana's teenage years were also marked by continued instability. In 1975, when she was 14, her grandfather, the 7th Earl Spencer, died. Her father inherited the title and became the 8th Earl Spencer, and with that inheritance came a new responsibility and a new home. The family left Park House and moved to Althorpe, the Spencer family's ancestral estate in Northamptonshire. Althorpe was grand and historic, a sprawling mansion with centuries of history embedded in its walls. But for Diana, it was just another change, another uprooting, another reminder that nothing in her life seemed permanent. Around this same time, her father remarried. His new wife was Rain, Countess of Dartmouth, a formidable woman with strong opinions and a forceful personality. The Spencer children, Diana included, struggled to accept their new stepmother. Rain was very different from their mother. She was assertive, commanding, and made significant changes to Althorpe without consulting the children. Diana, in particular, felt pushed aside, as though her father's attention and affection were now being directed elsewhere. The relationship between Diana and Rain was strained from the beginning and would remain difficult for many years. Despite these challenges, Diana continued to move forward. She left West Heath without any academic distinctions and briefly attended Institut Alpenwiedemannet, a finishing school in Switzerland. The experience was meant to polish her social skills and prepare her for life in high society. But Diana was homesick and unhappy. She returned to England after just one term, uncertain of what came next, but determined to find her own path. In 1978, at the age of 17, Diana moved to London. It was a bold step, a declaration of independence. She shared a flat in Coleherne Court, South Kensington, with 3 other young women. The apartment was modest but cozy, and for the first time in her life, Diana tasted real freedom. She wasn't living under the watchful eye of nannies, teachers, or family. She was simply Diana Spencer, a young woman trying to figure out who she was and what she wanted. To support herself, Diana took on various jobs. She worked as a nanny, caring for children with the same tenderness and patience she had shown her younger brother. She also worked as a nursery assistant at the Young England Kindergarten in Pimlico, a role she adored. She loved being around children, loved their honesty, their laughter, and their unguarded affection. She would arrive at work each morning with a smile, ready to read stories, help with art projects, and comfort scraped knees. Her co-workers remember her as cheerful, kind, and devoted to the children in her care. Diana's life during this period was simple and unassuming. She went to work, spent evenings with her flatmates, and occasionally attended social events through her family's connections. She wasn't particularly interested in the London party scene. She didn't smoke, rarely drank, and preferred quiet nights in to loud nightclubs. She was, in many ways, an ordinary young woman leading an ordinary life. But that ordinariness wouldn't last much longer, because in the summer of 1977, Diana Spencer had crossed paths with someone who would change the entire course of her life. She had met him briefly, casually, during a weekend at Althorpe. He was dating her older sister Sarah at the time, and Diana was just 16. A girl in the background, hardly noticed. His name was Charles, and he was the Prince of Wales. At the time, Diana could never have imagined that this man, 13 years her senior, would one day become her husband. She couldn't have known that her quiet, private life was about to be transformed into something public, scrutinized, and at times unbearably difficult. But destiny, as they say, has a way of unfolding in its own time, and Diana's destiny was about to begin. By the late 1970s, Prince Charles was under increasing pressure. He was approaching his 30s, still unmarried, and the British press and public were growing restless. As the heir to the throne, Charles had a duty, one that had been made clear to him since childhood, to marry, produce heirs, and secure the line of succession. But Charles was a complicated man, thoughtful and introspective, and he was not in a rush to marry simply for the sake of duty. Charles had spent much of his 20s in the Royal Navy, travelling the world and fulfilling his obligations to the crown. He had dated various women over the years, though none of the relationships had led to marriage. The press followed his romantic life with obsessive interest, speculating endlessly about who might become the next Princess of Wales. Every woman he was seen with became the subject of rumour and scrutiny. But there was one woman who had captured Charles's heart more than any other, Camilla Shand, later Camilla Parker Bowles. Charles and Camilla had met in the early 1970s and had developed a deep, genuine connection. They shared interests, humour, and an ease with one another that Charles rarely felt with others. Many believed that Charles would have married Camilla had circumstances been different, but Camilla was not considered a suitable match for the future king. She lacked the pedigree and, more importantly, the virginal reputation that was expected of a royal bride in that era. While Charles was away with the Navy, Camilla married Andrew Parker Bowles, an army officer, and Charles was left to move on. But he never quite did. Still, duty called, and by 1980, Charles knew he needed to find a wife. The pressure from his family, particularly from his father, Prince Philip, was mounting. The Queen, though more patient, also hoped to see her eldest son settled. And so, Charles began to consider who might be an appropriate match. It was during this time that Diana Spencer re-entered his life. They had met before, briefly, when Diana was just a teenager. But now, in the summer of 1980, Diana was 19 years old, and Charles saw her with new eyes. They encountered each other at a house party, and Charles was struck by how much she had changed. She was no longer the shy, awkward girl he vaguely remembered. She was poised, graceful, and disarmingly kind. Diana, for her part, was sympathetic to Charles. She had recently heard about the death of Lord Mountbatten, Charles's beloved great-uncle and mentor, who had been killed by an IRA bomb in 1979. Diana expressed her condolences with such genuine warmth and understanding that Charles was moved. Here was someone who seemed to truly see him, not just as a prince, but as a person experiencing grief. They began to spend more time together. Charles invited Diana to watch him play polo, to join him at Balmoral, the royal estate in Scotland, and to accompany him to the opera. Diana was thrilled. She found Charles charming, attentive, and utterly captivating. He was the Prince of Wales, heir to the throne, and he was interested in her. For a young woman who had spent much of her life feeling overlooked and uncertain, the attention was intoxicating. But Diana was also innocent. She had little experience with romantic relationships. She was genuine, open, and trusting in a way that Charles, perhaps, found refreshing. He had spent years navigating the complexities of royal life and the scrutiny of the press. Diana, by contrast, seemed uncomplicated, sweet, and eager to please. Charles's family approved of Diana. She came from an aristocratic family with royal connections. She had no scandalous past, no former boyfriends to speak of, and she was young enough to be moulded into the role of Princess of Wales. She was, by all traditional standards, a suitable bride. But there were those who wondered whether Charles truly loved Diana. Did he see her as a partner, an equal, someone he could build a life with? Or did he see her as a solution to a problem, a means to fulfill his duty and satisfy the expectations placed upon him? Diana, in her youthful optimism, believed that Charles loved her. She believed that their relationship, though relatively new, was the beginning of a great love story. She dreamed of marriage, of a family, of a life spent together. She was romantic, idealistic, and deeply in love with the idea of being loved by a prince. And so, when Charles proposed to Diana in February 1981, she said yes without hesitation. The proposal itself was not particularly romantic. It took place in the nursery at Windsor Castle, a room hardly befitting such a momentous occasion. Charles asked Diana if she would marry him, and when she said yes, his response was telling. "Whatever in love means," he would later say in an interview. The comment, though perhaps meant to sound philosophical, revealed a certain emotional distance, a hesitation that Diana, in her excitement, failed to notice. The engagement was announced to the world on February 24th, 1981, and the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Diana was suddenly thrust into the spotlight in a way she had never experienced before. Photographers camped outside her apartment. Journalists dug into her background. The public, hungry for details, wanted to know everything about this young woman who would one day be queen. Diana tried her best to navigate the sudden attention. She posed for photographs, smiled for the cameras, and gave her first televised interview alongside Charles. She was nervous, clearly out of her depth, but she handled herself with grace. The public fell in love with her instantly. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was relatable. She blushed, she giggled. She seemed real in a way that the royal family often did not. But behind the scenes, Diana was struggling. She had moved out of her flat and into Clarence House, one of the royal residences, and for the first time, she began to understand just how isolating royal life could be. She was surrounded by staff, by protocol, by rules she didn't fully understand. She had little privacy, little freedom, and little support. Charles, busy with his own duties, was often absent, and Diana found herself alone, trying to prepare for a wedding and a role she wasn't sure she was ready for. And then, just weeks before the wedding, Diana discovered something that shattered her illusions. She found out that Charles was still in contact with Camilla Parker Bowles. She learned that Charles had commissioned a bracelet as a gift for Camilla, engraved with their initials. The revelation was devastating. Diana confronted Charles, but he dismissed her concerns. Camilla was a friend, he said. Nothing more. But Diana knew better. She could feel it. The way Charles spoke about Camilla, the way his eyes softened when her name was mentioned. Diana realized, with a sinking heart, that she was not the love of Charles's life. She was the suitable choice, the acceptable bride, but she was not the one he truly wanted. Diana considered calling off the wedding. She confided in her sisters, expressing her doubts and fears, but they, along with others, encouraged her to go through with it. The invitations had been sent. The world was watching. It was too late to back out now. And so, on July 29th, 1981, Diana Spencer walked down the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral and became the Princess of Wales. The wedding was a spectacle unlike anything the world had seen in decades. An estimated 750 million people around the globe tuned in to watch the ceremony. The streets of London were lined with cheering crowds, waving flags and celebrating the union. Diana, wearing a stunning ivory silk taffeta gown with a 25-foot train, looked every bit the fairy tale princess. She was radiant, beautiful, and visibly nervous. Charles, dressed in his naval uniform, waited for her at the altar. As Diana made her way down the aisle, her father, Earl Spencer, by her side, she trembled with a mixture of excitement and dread. This was the moment she had dreamed of, and yet, beneath the grandeur and the pageantry, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. The ceremony proceeded without a hitch. Diana and Charles exchanged vows, though Diana famously mixed up the order of Charles's names, calling him Philip Charles Arthur George instead of Charles Philip Arthur George. It was a small mistake, a humanizing moment that endeared her even more to the public. When the ceremony concluded, the newly married couple emerged from the cathedral to thunderous applause. They rode in a horse-drawn carriage back to Buckingham Palace, waving to the crowds that lined the streets. On the balcony of the palace, they appeared before the gathered masses and shared a kiss, a moment that was broadcast around the world and became one of the most iconic images of the decade. To the outside world, it was a perfect day, a perfect union. But for Diana, the fairy tale was already beginning to unravel. The honeymoon should have been a time of joy and intimacy, a chance for the newlyweds to escape the pressures of public life and get to know one another. But for Diana and Charles, the honeymoon was anything but blissful. They spent the first part of their honeymoon aboard the royal yacht Britannia, cruising through the Mediterranean. It should have been romantic, the sun, the sea, the privacy. But Diana quickly realized that Charles had brought along books about philosophy and spirituality, topics that interested him, but left Diana feeling excluded. He spent hours reading, lost in thought, while Diana felt increasingly lonely and isolated. She also noticed that Charles seemed distant, preoccupied. He spoke often of Camilla, sharing anecdotes and memories in a way that made Diana deeply uncomfortable. Diana tried to express her feelings, but Charles didn't seem to understand, or perhaps didn't want to. He viewed Diana's concerns as irrational jealousy, the insecurity of a young and inexperienced woman. He didn't see, or chose not to see, the pain he was causing. The second part of their honeymoon was spent at Balmoral, the royal family's estate in Scotland. This should have been a time for Diana to bond with her new in-laws, but instead, it highlighted just how different she was from the rest of the royal family. The Windsors were reserved, formal, and deeply rooted in tradition. They enjoyed country pursuits, hunting, fishing, long walks in the rugged Scottish landscape. Diana, by contrast, was a city girl. She didn't hunt, she didn't fish, and she found the cold, remote estate rather bleak. She tried to fit in, to adapt, but she felt like an outsider. Meals were formal and conversation was stilted. Diana's attempts at warmth and informality were met with polite but distant smiles. The Queen was kind but reserved. Prince Philip was gruff, and sometimes dismissive. The rest of the family seemed pleasant enough, but didn't go out of their way to make Diana feel welcome. And Charles, rather than supporting Diana and helping her navigate this new world, seemed almost annoyed by her struggles. He expected her to simply adjust, to understand the unspoken rules and expectations of royal life without much guidance. He didn't realize, or perhaps didn't care, that Diana was drowning. By the time they returned to London, Diana was pregnant. The news was announced in November 1981, just a few months after the wedding, and the public was thrilled. A royal baby was on the way, and Diana, already beloved, became even more cherished by the British people. But the pregnancy was difficult. Diana suffered from severe morning sickness, a condition known as hyperemesis gravidarum, which left her exhausted and ill. She lost weight rather than gaining it, and there were concerns about her health and the health of the baby. Charles, while concerned, seemed unsure of how to help. He was not naturally nurturing, and Diana's emotional needs, her need for reassurance, affection, and support, were foreign to him. During this time, Diana also began to experience the first signs of the eating disorder that would plague her for years. The stress of royal life, the pressure to maintain a perfect image, and her feelings of inadequacy all took a toll on her. She began to binge and purge, a coping mechanism that gave her a sense of control in a life that felt increasingly out of her hands. She kept it secret, ashamed and afraid of what others might think. Charles, unaware of the depth of Diana's struggles, continued with his royal duties. He travelled, gave speeches, and fulfilled his obligations, often leaving Diana alone. Diana, in turn, felt abandoned. She needed her husband, but he wasn't there. She needed a partner, but she had married a man who seemed more committed to his duties than to his marriage. On June 21st, 1982, Diana gave birth to a son. Prince William Arthur Philip Louis was born at St Mary's Hospital in London, and the nation rejoiced. Diana was overjoyed. She adored William from the moment she held him. He was her baby, her purpose, and in him she found a source of unconditional love that she desperately needed. Charles was proud to have a son and heir, but his reaction was more measured, more restrained. He loved William, certainly, but he didn't express it in the open, affectionate way that Diana did. Where Diana cooed and cuddled, Charles was more formal, more distant. It was another source of tension between them. Motherhood brought Diana a new sense of fulfillment, but it also brought new challenges. She was expected to continue with royal duties, to attend events and engagements, even while caring for a newborn. She was exhausted, overwhelmed, and still struggling with her eating disorder and her fragile mental state. She experienced what we would now recognize as postpartum depression, but at the time, there was little understanding or support for such conditions, especially within the royal family. Diana pushed through. She attended events, smiled for the cameras, and played the role of the perfect princess, but inside, she was crumbling. In 1984, Diana gave birth to a second son, Prince Harry. His arrival brought her immense joy, and Diana poured her love into both of her boys. She was determined to give them a childhood that was as normal as possible, despite their royal status. She took them to theme parks, to McDonald's, to homeless shelters and hospitals. She wanted them to understand the world beyond palace walls, to see that not everyone lived in privilege, and to develop empathy and compassion. Her approach to motherhood was revolutionary for a royal. Previous generations had been more hands-off, relying on nannies and staff to do the bulk of child rearing. But Diana was different. She insisted on being involved in every aspect of her sons' lives. She chose their schools, participated in their activities, and was there for bedtime stories and goodnight kisses. She was a mother first, a princess second, and the public adored her for it. But her marriage continued to deteriorate. By the mid-1980s, it was clear to those close to the couple that Diana and Charles were deeply unhappy. They had different interests, different temperaments, and different views on life. Charles found Diana too emotional, too needy. Diana found Charles cold, aloof, and still in love with Camilla. And Camilla, it turned out, had never really left the picture. By the late 1980s, the cracks in Diana and Charles's marriage were impossible to hide. What had begun as private unhappiness was now becoming public knowledge. The press, always hungry for a story, began to report on the tension between the Prince and Princess of Wales. Headlines speculated about their separate lives, their different interests, and the rumours of infidelity. Diana, feeling trapped and desperate, began to seek comfort outside her marriage. She formed close friendships with several men, some of which may have crossed into emotional affairs. She confided in them, shared her pain, and found solace in their attention. Whether these relationships became physical is a matter of speculation and debate, but what is clear is that Diana was seeking the love and validation she wasn't receiving from Charles. Charles, meanwhile, had resumed his relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles. What had once been a friendship had rekindled into something more. They spoke frequently on the phone, met in private, and provided each other with the emotional support and understanding that was missing from their respective marriages. Charles believed he had a right to this relationship, that after years of trying to make his marriage work, he deserved to find happiness, even if it was outside the bounds of his marriage. Diana knew about Camilla. She had always known, in some sense, but now the reality was undeniable. She found evidence, phone bills, letters, small gifts. She confronted Charles repeatedly, and each time he denied it or dismissed her concerns. The gaslighting, as we would call it today, took a severe toll on Diana's mental health. The situation reached a breaking point in 1989 when, at a party, Diana confronted Camilla directly. It was a bold, unprecedented move. Diana approached Camilla and told her, with remarkable composure, that she knew about the affair and that she was not a threat. "I know what's going on," Diana said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Camilla, taken aback, tried to deny it, but Diana persisted. It was a moment of courage, a moment where Diana reclaimed some sense of power in a situation where she had felt powerless for so long. But confronting Camilla didn't change anything. Charles continued the affair, and Diana continued to suffer. The press dubbed this period the War of the Waleses, a reference to the very public battle between Diana and Charles for public sympathy. Both began to use the media to shape their narratives. Diana, with the help of friends and carefully chosen journalists, shared her side of the story. She let it be known, through intermediaries, that she was unhappy, that she felt unloved, and that Charles was having an affair. Charles, advised by his team, also engaged with the press, though more subtly. He portrayed himself as a man burdened by duty, married to a woman who was emotionally unstable and difficult to manage. He suggested that Diana's problems were of her own making, that she was irrational and overly dramatic. The public, however, sided overwhelmingly with Diana. She was young, beautiful, and sympathetic. She was the wronged wife, the devoted mother, the woman who had given everything to a man and a family that didn't appreciate her. Charles, by contrast, was seen as cold, privileged, and unfaithful. His public image suffered greatly. In 1992, the situation escalated dramatically with the publication of a book titled Diana, Her True Story, by Andrew Morton. The book was explosive. It detailed Diana's struggles with bulimia, her suicide attempts, and the emotional abuse she had endured within her marriage. It painted a picture of a woman trapped in a loveless marriage, suffering in silence, while the institution of the monarchy looked the other way. Initially, Diana denied any involvement in the book. The palace, in turn, dismissed it as sensationalized tabloid fodder, but it soon became clear that Diana had, in fact, cooperated with Morton through a close friend. She had wanted her story told, and she had used the book to do it. The publication of Diana, Her True Story, was a turning point. It shattered the facade that the palace had worked so hard to maintain. It confirmed what many had suspected, that the marriage was not just troubled, but fundamentally broken, and it made Diana's pain public in a way that could no longer be ignored. Charles was furious. The Queen was deeply disturbed. The royal family, an institution built on tradition, decorum, and privacy, had been exposed in the most intimate and unflattering way. The palace went into crisis mode, trying to manage the fallout, but the damage was done. Later that year, transcripts of private phone conversations were leaked to the press. First, a conversation between Diana and a close male friend, James Gilby, in what became known as Squidgygate, and then a conversation between Charles and Camilla, in what was dubbed Camillagate. The latter was particularly damaging. The conversation was intimate, sexual, and left no doubt about the nature of Charles and Camilla's relationship. The public was scandalized, and Charles's reputation hit an all-time low. In December 1992, Prime Minister John Major announced to Parliament that the Prince and Princess of Wales were separating. The fairy tale marriage was officially over. The separation was painful, but it also gave Diana a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in years. She was no longer bound by the same expectations, no longer required to play the role of the dutiful wife. She could, for the first time, begin to define herself on her own terms. Diana threw herself into her charitable work with renewed energy. She had always been passionate about helping others, but now it became her primary focus. She became a patron of numerous charities, focusing on issues that were often overlooked or stigmatized: HIV/AIDS, homelessness, mental health, and landmines. Her work with HIV/AIDS patients was particularly groundbreaking. In the 1980s and early 1990s, there was immense fear and misunderstanding surrounding the disease. Many believed it could be transmitted through casual contact, and those who were infected were often ostracized and treated as pariahs. Diana, however, made a point of visiting hospitals and hospices, shaking hands with patients, hugging them, and sitting with them. She showed, through her actions, that people with HIV/AIDS deserved compassion and dignity, not fear and judgment. One of the most iconic images of Diana is a photograph of her holding the hand of a man dying of AIDS. Her lack of gloves, her gentle touch, and her compassionate expression sent a powerful message to the world. She was not afraid. She did not judge. She cared. Diana's humanitarian work extended beyond the UK. She travelled to Angola and Bosnia to raise awareness about the devastating impact of landmines. She walked through former minefields, met with victims who had lost limbs, and called for an international ban on these weapons. Her advocacy was instrumental in bringing global attention to the issue, and ultimately contributed to the passage of the Ottawa Treaty, which banned the use, production, and stockpiling of landmines. Through her charity work, Diana found a sense of purpose and fulfillment that had eluded her in her marriage. She was making a difference, touching lives, and using her platform for good. The public, already enamored with her, grew to respect her not just for her beauty or her troubles, but for her genuine compassion and her willingness to engage with the most vulnerable members of society. But Diana's personal life remained complicated. She dated several men following her separation from Charles, seeking companionship and love. Some relationships were brief, others more serious, but none brought her the lasting happiness she sought. The press followed her every move, scrutinizing her relationships and often invading her privacy in ways that were deeply distressing. In 1995, Diana made a decision that would shock the world. She agreed to give a televised interview to the BBC's Panorama programme, conducted by journalist Martin Bashir. The interview was done in secret, without the knowledge or approval of the palace, and when it aired, it sent shockwaves through the nation. Sitting in Kensington Palace, speaking directly to the camera, Diana opened up about her marriage, her struggles, and her life in a way she never had before. She spoke candidly about Charles's affair with Camilla, famously saying, "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." She discussed her own emotional struggles, her battle with bulimia, and the intense pressure she had faced as a member of the royal family. She also revealed that she, too, had been involved in an extramarital relationship, admitting to an affair with James Hewitt, a former cavalry officer. The admission was startling, but Diana presented it as a response to the loneliness and isolation she had felt in her marriage. Perhaps most controversially, Diana expressed doubt about whether Charles was suited to be king. She suggested that he might be happier in a different role, and that the path to the throne might be better served by skipping a generation and passing directly to William. It was a bold, even reckless statement, one that challenged the very foundation of the monarchy. The Panorama interview was watched by millions and became one of the most talked about television events of the decade. The public's reaction was mixed. Many sympathized with Diana, seeing her as a woman who had been wronged and who was finally telling her truth. Others felt she had gone too far, that airing such private matters on national television was inappropriate and damaging to the institution of the monarchy. The Queen, faced with the fallout from the interview and the ongoing turmoil, made a decision. She wrote to both Charles and Diana, urging them to divorce. It was a rare and significant intervention, a clear signal that the situation could no longer continue as it was. Diana agreed, though not without hesitation. Divorce would mean losing her title of Her Royal Highness, a symbolic but significant demotion. It would also mean navigating complex negotiations about her role, her access to her sons, and her financial settlement. But Diana was ready. She wanted closure, and she wanted to move forward with her life. The divorce was finalized on August 28, 1996. Diana was granted a substantial financial settlement, and she retained her residence at Kensington Palace. She was allowed to continue to be involved in her sons' lives and to maintain her public role, though she was no longer officially a member of the royal family. Diana was, at last, free. In the summer of 1997, Diana seemed to be entering a new chapter of her life. She was happier, more confident, and more at peace than she had been in years. She had found a new romantic interest, Dodi Fayed, the son of billionaire businessman Mohammed Al Fayed, who owned Harrods department store and the Ritz Hotel in Paris. Diana and Dodi had known each other casually for years, but their relationship became romantic in the summer of 1997. They spent time together on the French Riviera, vacationing on Dodi's father's yacht, enjoying the sun, the sea, and the privacy that such a setting afforded. The press, of course, followed them relentlessly, capturing photographs of the couple kissing and embracing. The images were splashed across newspapers and magazines around the world. The public was fascinated by Diana's new relationship. Some were happy for her, seeing Dodi as a kind and attentive partner who made Diana smile. Others were skeptical, questioning whether the relationship was genuine or merely a rebound. There was also an undercurrent of prejudice. Dodi was Egyptian, Muslim, and from a family that, while wealthy, was not considered part of the traditional British establishment. Some in the media and the public were uncomfortable with the idea of Diana, the mother of the future king, being involved with someone outside the accepted social circles. Diana, however, seemed unbothered by the criticism. She was enjoying herself, living her life on her own terms, and for the first time in a long time, she felt free. On August 30th, 1997, Diana and Dodi spent the evening in Paris. They dined at the Ritz Hotel, owned by Dodi's father, and then decided to return to Dodi's apartment. They wanted to avoid the paparazzi, who had been following them throughout the day, so a plan was devised. A decoy car would leave from the front of the hotel, drawing the photographers away, while Diana and Dodi would slip out the back entrance in a different vehicle. The plan, however, didn't work. The paparazzi quickly realized the ruse and gave chase. Diana, Dodi, and their driver, Henri Paul, sped through the streets of Paris in a black Mercedes, trying to escape the pursuing motorcycles and cars. Henri Paul, it would later be revealed, had been drinking and was also under the influence of prescription medication. He was driving far too fast, well over the speed limit. Just after midnight, as the car entered the Pont de l'Alma tunnel along the Seine River, Henri Paul lost control. The Mercedes crashed into a pillar at high speed. The impact was devastating. Dodi Fayed and Henri Paul were killed instantly. Diana's bodyguard, Trevor Rees-Jones, was severely injured but survived. Diana, sitting in the back seat, was critically injured. She was conscious immediately after the crash, but her internal injuries were severe. Emergency responders arrived quickly and worked to stabilize her before transporting her to the Pitié-Salpêtrière hospital. Doctors fought desperately to save her life, performing emergency surgery to repair her damaged heart and lungs, but the injuries were too extensive. At 4 a.m. on August 31st, 1997, Diana, Princess of Wales, was pronounced dead. She was just 36 years old. The news of Diana's death spread quickly, and the world was plunged into shock and grief. People woke up to the devastating headlines, unable to believe that the beloved Princess of Wales, who had seemed so full of life just hours before, was gone. In Britain, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Mourners flocked to Kensington Palace, Diana's London residence, laying flowers, cards and tributes outside the gates. The sea of flowers grew larger with each passing hour, eventually covering vast stretches of the surrounding parks. People from all walks of life came to pay their respects, young and old, rich and poor, people who had met Diana and people who had only admired her from afar. The grief was palpable. Many wept openly, holding each other, sharing memories of Diana and what she had meant to them. She was the People's Princess, a title given to her by Prime Minister Tony Blair in a statement shortly after her death, and it was a title that captured the essence of who she was. Diana had connected with ordinary people in a way that few royals ever had. She had been approachable, warm and genuine, and now she was gone, and the loss felt deeply personal to millions. But amid the public mourning, there was also anger. Anger at the paparazzi, who had chased Diana through the streets of Paris in pursuit of a photograph. Anger at the tabloid culture that had invaded her privacy, commodified her pain, and turned her life into a spectacle. And for some, anger at the royal family, who were perceived as cold and unfeeling in the immediate aftermath of Diana's death. The Queen and the rest of the royal family were at Balmoral when they received the news. They made the decision to remain there, focusing on comforting Diana's sons, William and Harry, who were just 15 and 12 years old. The family believed that staying out of the public eye and shielding the boys from the media circus was the right course of action. But to the public, the silence from the palace felt like indifference. There was no immediate statement, no public acknowledgement of the nation's grief. The flag at Buckingham Palace was not lowered to half-mast, as per protocol, since the palace was unoccupied. To many, it seemed as though the royal family did not care. that they were more concerned with protocol than with honoring the memory of a woman who had meant so much to so many. The pressure on the royal family grew. Newspapers ran critical headlines, questioning the Queen's absence and calling for a more visible show of mourning. The public's mood was shifting from grief to frustration, and there was a real sense that the monarchy was out of touch. Eventually, the Queen relented. She returned to London, addressed the nation in a televised broadcast, and acknowledged Diana's impact and the depth of the public's grief. It was a rare moment of vulnerability from a monarch known for her stoicism, and it helped to ease some of the tension. The flag at Buckingham Palace was lowered to half-mast, and preparations began for Diana's funeral. Diana's funeral took place on September 6, 1997, at Westminster Abbey. It was a state funeral in all but name, an extraordinary honour for someone who, at the time of her death, was no longer technically a member of the royal family. The service was watched by an estimated 2.5 billion people around the world, making it one of the most watched events in television history. In Britain, nearly 32 million people tuned in, and the streets of London were lined with mourners who stood in silence as Diana's coffin was carried through the city. The coffin was draped in the royal standard and topped with a wreath of white roses. 3 cards lay on top, one from Prince Charles, one from Prince William, and one from Prince Harry. Harry's card bore a single word: Mummy. The image of William and Harry walking behind their mother's coffin, their heads bowed, their faces stoic, was heartbreaking. They were so young, thrust into a public display of grief that no child should ever have to endure. The world watched, and the wide world wept with them. Inside Westminster Abbey, the service was both grand and deeply personal. Elton John, a close friend of Diana's, performed a reworked version of his song Candle in the Wind, originally written about Marilyn Monroe. The new lyrics, penned specifically for Diana, captured the sense of loss and the recognition of her unique place in the hearts of the public. "Goodbye, England's Rose," he sang, his voice breaking with emotion. Diana's brother, Earl Spencer, delivered a eulogy that was both a tribute and a rebuke. He spoke lovingly of his sister, recalling her warmth, her humour, and her compassion. But he also took aim at the press and, indirectly, at the royal family. He criticised the media for their relentless pursuit of Diana and their role in her death, and he made a pointed reference to the royal family's treatment of Diana, vowing that her blood family would ensure that William and Harry were raised with an understanding of their mother's values and spirit. The eulogy was met with applause, first from the crowds outside, watching on giant screens, and then, tentatively, from inside the Abbey itself. It was an unprecedented moment, a breach of the usual solemnity of such occasions, but it reflected the intensity of the public's feelings. After the service, Diana's coffin was taken to her family's estate at Althorpe, where she was laid to rest on an island in the middle of an ornamental lake. The location was chosen for its privacy and tranquility, a final resting place where Diana could be at peace, away from the cameras and the scrutiny that had defined so much of her life. Diana's death left a void that has never truly been filled. In the years since, countless books, documentaries, and articles have been written about her, analysing her life, her impact, and her legacy. But beyond the analysis and the endless fascination, what remains most clear is that Diana changed the world in ways both large and small. She changed the British monarchy. Before Diana, the royal family was distant, formal, and largely insulated from the lives of ordinary people. Diana broke down those barriers. She showed emotion publicly. She hugged people. She spoke about her struggles, and she connected with people on a human level. Her influence can be seen in the way the younger generation of royals, William, Harry, and Kate, approach their roles. They are more open, more accessible, and more willing to engage with social issues in a way that would have been unthinkable before Diana. She changed the conversation around mental health by speaking openly about her struggles with bulimia and depression. Diana helped to destigmatize mental illness. She showed that even someone who seemed to have everything could be suffering inside, and she encouraged others to seek help and to speak their truth. She changed attitudes toward HIV/AIDS, homelessness, and numerous other social issues. Her willingness to touch, to embrace, and to sit with those who were marginalized or suffering challenged prejudices and inspired compassion. Her work on landmines led to real, tangible change, saving countless lives. But perhaps most importantly, Diana showed what it means to lead with empathy. In a world that often values power, wealth, and status above all else, Diana valued kindness, compassion, and genuine connection. She used her position not to elevate herself, but to lift others up. She saw people, not as subjects, not as photo opportunities, but as fellow human beings deserving of dignity and love. Her sons, William and Harry, have carried forward her legacy in their own ways. William, now the Prince of Wales, has championed mental health initiatives and has worked to modernize the monarchy while honoring his mother's memory. Harry, though he has stepped back from royal duties, has continued Diana's humanitarian work, advocating for mental health, supporting veterans, and speaking out on issues of social justice. Both have spoken movingly about their mother, about the pain of losing her at such a young age, and about the ways in which her influence continues to guide them. In interviews, they have shared stories of her warmth, her sense of humor, and her determination to give them as normal a childhood as possible. They have also been candid about the impact of her death and the challenges of growing up in the public eye. Diana's story is one of contradictions. She was a princess who was also profoundly human. She was immensely privileged, yet deeply vulnerable. She was adored by millions, yet often felt alone. She was flawed, as we all are, but she was also extraordinary in her capacity for love and her commitment to making the world a better place. Her life was cut tragically short, and we can only wonder what more she might have accomplished had she lived. But in her 36 years, she left an indelible mark on the world, a mark defined not by titles or tiaras, but by the simple, powerful act of caring. In the years since Diana's death, questions have persisted. Some have been answered. Others remain subjects of speculation and debate. The investigation into the crash concluded that Henri Paul, the driver, was intoxicated and driving recklessly, and that the pursuing paparazzi contributed to the circumstances that led to the crash. However, conspiracy theories have continued to circulate, fueled in part by Mohammed Al-Fayed, Dodi's father, who maintained for years that Diana and his son were murdered. He suggested that the British establishment, uncomfortable with Diana's relationship with Dodi and fearful of her influence, orchestrated their deaths. Multiple investigations, including an extensive inquest in the UK, found no evidence to support these theories. The official conclusion remains that Diana's death was a tragic accident caused by a combination of high speed, an intoxicated driver, and the failure to wear seatbelts. Yet for some, the questions linger. What if Diana had been wearing her seatbelt? What if the paparazzi had given her space? What if she had never gotten into that car? The what-ifs are endless and painful, a reminder of how fragile life can be and how quickly everything can change. The first years of Diana's marriage were a whirlwind of activity, expectation, and learning. She had married into the most famous family in the world, and now she had to learn, often through trial and error, what it meant to be a member of the royal family. Royal life came with rules, hundreds of them, many unwritten, passed down through generations. There were rules about how to dress, how to walk, how to sit, how to speak, and even how to hold a teacup. There were protocols for every occasion, hierarchies to navigate, and expectations that felt at times suffocating. Diana had grown up in aristocratic circles, so she wasn't entirely unfamiliar with formality and tradition. But being a Spencer was different from being a Windsor. The Spencers, while noble, enjoyed a certain degree of freedom and informality. The royal family, by contrast, operated within a much more rigid structure. Everything was planned, scheduled, and scrutinized. Privacy was a luxury that barely existed. In those early days, Diana made mistakes. She wore the wrong thing to certain events. She used the wrong fork at formal dinners. She spoke too candidly to members of the press. Each misstep was noted, criticized, and sometimes ridiculed by the tabloids. Diana, sensitive by nature, took these criticisms to heart. She wanted desperately to do well, to make Charles proud, to win the approval of the Queen and the rest of the family. But the learning curve was steep, and she often felt like she was failing. One of the challenges Diana faced was the formality of royal engagements. She was expected to attend numerous events, charity galas, state dinners, receptions, award ceremonies, and at each one she had to be poised, gracious, and perfectly presented. She had to make small talk with strangers, remember names and faces, and always smile, even when she was exhausted or unwell. Diana's natural warmth and charm made her well suited to these engagements in many ways. People were drawn to her. She had a gift for making others feel seen and valued, even in brief interactions. But the constant scrutiny, the relentless schedule, and the pressure to be perfect took a toll on her mental and physical health. In 1983, Diana and Charles embarked on their first major overseas tour together, a 6-week trip to Australia and New Zealand. It was a significant moment, not just for Diana, but for the monarchy itself. The tour would test Diana's ability to handle the demands of royal life on a global stage, and it would also reveal just how much the public adored her. Before the tour began, there were doubts. Diana was still relatively new to royal duties, and there were concerns about whether she could handle the grueling schedule and the intense media attention. Some palace officials worried that she might falter under the pressure. But Diana surprised everyone. From the moment they arrived in Australia, it was clear that Diana was the star of the show. Crowds gathered by the thousands to catch a glimpse of her. They cheered, waved flags, and held up signs declaring their love for the Princess of Wales. When Charles and Diana walked along the barriers greeting well-wishers, a practice known as a walkabout, people on Charles's side of the barrier visibly groaned with disappointment, hoping Diana would come their way instead. Charles, to his credit, handled this with humour, at least initially. "I'm sorry," he would say with a wry smile. "You've got the wrong one." But as the tour went on, it became clear that the public's focus on Diana was not a passing phenomenon. She was the one they wanted to see, the one they connected with, and the one whose photograph would sell newspapers and magazines. Diana herself was surprised by the intensity of the public's affection. She later admitted that the attention was overwhelming and at times frightening. But she rose to the occasion. She shook hands, accepted flowers, listened to people's stories, and engaged with the crowds in a way that felt genuine and heartfelt. She wasn't just performing a duty. She was connecting with people, and they felt it. One of the most memorable moments of the Australia tour came when Diana and Charles visited a children's hospital. Diana spent time with sick children, sitting on their beds, holding their hands, and speaking to them with such tenderness that nurses and parents were moved to tears. One photograph from that visit showing Diana cradling a seriously ill child, became iconic. It captured everything that made Diana special: her compassion, her willingness to engage with suffering, and her complete lack of pretension. The tour was deemed a resounding success, and Diana returned to Britain with newfound confidence. She had proven that she could handle the demands of royal life, and more importantly, she had discovered that she had a real gift for connecting with people. It was a gift she would continue to develop and use throughout her life. But success came with its own challenges. The more popular Diana became, the more complicated her relationship with Charles grew. Charles was used to being the center of attention. He was the heir to the throne, and royal tours were traditionally about him. But now, he found himself overshadowed by his wife. The press wrote more about Diana's outfits than his speeches. Crowds clamored for Diana, not for him. And while Charles tried to be gracious about it, there was an undeniable tension. Diana, for her part, didn't seek the attention. In fact, she often found it burdensome. She wanted to be a supportive wife, to stand beside Charles rather than in front of him. But she couldn't control the public's reaction. People loved her, and there was nothing she could do to change that. Diana's impact on fashion cannot be overstated. From the moment she stepped into the public eye, she became a global style icon. Designers clamored to dress her. Magazines devoted entire issues to analyzing her wardrobe, and women around the world tried to emulate her look. In the early years of her marriage, Diana's style was romantic and somewhat conventional. She favored soft fabrics, pastel colors, and feminine silhouettes. Her wedding dress, designed by David and Elizabeth Emanuel, set the tone. It was grand, dramatic, and unmistakably princess-like. The puffed sleeves, the voluminous skirt, and the 25-foot train epitomized early 1980s bridal fashion and influenced wedding dress trends for years to come. As Diana grew more confident, her style evolved. She began to experiment with bolder colors, sleeker lines, and more sophisticated designs. She worked with a number of designers, including Catherine Walker, who became one of her favorites. Walker understood Diana's needs. She created elegant, timeless pieces that were both beautiful and practical for the demands of royal life. Diana's fashion choices were about more than just looking good. She used clothing as a form of communication, a way to express herself and to connect with the people she was meeting. When she visited Japan, she wore red and white, the colors of the Japanese flag. When she attended events for AIDS charities, she chose bold, vibrant colors to challenge the somber, fearful associations with the disease. When she wanted to make a statement of independence, she wore daring outfits, like the now famous revenge dress, a sleek black off-the-shoulder gown she wore to a public event on the same night Charles's televised confession of adultery aired. Diana understood the power of image. She knew that a well-chosen outfit could convey confidence, compassion, or defiance. She knew that fashion could be a tool, and she wielded it skillfully. But Diana's relationship with fashion was also complicated. She was aware that she was being judged constantly. Every outfit scrutinized, every hairstyle analyzed. The pressure to look perfect was relentless, and it fed into her insecurities and her eating disorder. She wanted to be beautiful, not out of vanity, but because she felt that her worth was tied to her appearance. If she looked good, people would love her. If she looked good, maybe Charles would love her. Over time, Diana's style became more relaxed and personal. In her later years, she favored simpler, more casual looks, jeans and blazers, oversized sweatshirts for gym sessions, elegant but understated dresses for evening events. She was no longer trying to conform to anyone's expectations. She was dressing for herself, and that confidence showed. Diana's influence on fashion extended far beyond her lifetime. Designers continue to reference her style, and her most iconic looks are still celebrated and recreated today. The Diana effect was real. When she wore something, it sold out immediately. She could make or break a designer's career with a single appearance. But more than the clothes themselves, Diana changed what it meant to be fashionable. She showed that style wasn't about following rules. It was about authenticity, about wearing what made you feel good, and about using fashion as a form of self-expression. As the 1980s progressed, Diana's struggles with her mental health deepened. The eating disorder that had begun during her engagement continued throughout her marriage, ebbing and flowing in intensity, depending on the stress she was under. Bulimia nervosa is a cruel illness. It's characterized by cycles of binge eating followed by purging, through vomiting, excessive exercise, or the use of laxatives. For Diana, the disorder was both a coping mechanism and a form of self-punishment. When she felt overwhelmed, when she felt unloved, when she felt like she was losing control of her life, bulimia gave her something she could control. It was a way to manage her emotions, to numb the pain, even if only temporarily. Diana later spoke openly about her bulimia, describing it as a symptom of the unhappiness in her marriage and the pressure she felt to be perfect. "It was a symptom of what was going on in my marriage," she said in an interview. "I was crying out for help, but giving the wrong signals." The disorder had serious physical consequences. Diana's weight fluctuated dramatically. She suffered from fatigue, dizziness, and other health problems. Those close to her noticed the signs: the frequent trips to the bathroom after meals, the preoccupation with food, the mood swings. But in the 1980s, there was less understanding and awareness of eating disorders. Diana felt ashamed and alone in her struggle. Charles, though aware that Diana was suffering, didn't know how to help her. He found her emotional intensity difficult to manage. He was a man who valued stoicism and self-control, and Diana's openness about her feelings, her tears, and her needs felt foreign and uncomfortable to him. Rather than offering support, he often withdrew, which only deepened Diana's sense of isolation. Diana also experienced bouts of severe depression. There were moments when she felt so hopeless, so trapped, that she engaged in self-harm. In her Panorama interview, Diana revealed that she had hurt herself, saying, "You have so much pain inside yourself that you try and hurt yourself on the outside because you want help." One particularly troubling incident occurred when Diana, pregnant with William and feeling desperately unhappy, threw herself down a flight of stairs at Sandringham. She was not seriously injured, and William was unharmed. But the incident was a clear cry for help. Diana later said that she didn't intend to kill herself or her baby. She just wanted Charles, who she felt was ignoring her distress, to listen to her, to see how much pain she was in. Charles, when he found her, was shaken but also frustrated. He didn't know how to respond to such dramatic gestures. The Queen Mother, who was also present, reportedly stepped over Diana and calmly went about her day, a reaction that reflected the stiff upper lip mentality of the older generation of royals. Diana's mental health struggles were compounded by the constant media attention. Everywhere she went, cameras followed. Photographers camped outside her home, pursued her in cars, and invaded her privacy at every turn. The press's obsession with Diana was insatiable. They wanted photographs of her at her best and at her worst. They wanted stories about her marriage, her clothes, her friendships, her every move. Diana had a complicated relationship with the media. On one hand, she understood that the press could be useful. Positive coverage helped her charitable causes and allowed her to shape her public image. On the other hand, the intrusion was relentless and deeply distressing. She felt hunted, trapped, unable to live a normal life. There were moments when Diana tried to use the media to her advantage, leaking stories or cooperating with certain journalists to present her side of the story. But this strategy often backfired, leading to accusations that she was manipulative or seeking attention. It was a no-win situation. If she cooperated with the press, she was criticized. If she avoided them, they became more aggressive. If there was one constant source of joy and purpose in Diana's life, it was her sons. William and Harry were the center of her world, and she was determined to be the best mother she could be, despite the challenges of royal life. Diana's approach to motherhood was revolutionary for a royal. Previous generations of royals had been raised primarily by nannies and staff, with limited involvement from their parents. The Queen, for example, had been a devoted but somewhat distant mother, shaped by the expectations of her era and her role. But Diana wanted something different for her sons. She wanted to be hands-on, involved, and present in their lives. From the beginning, Diana broke with royal tradition. She insisted on taking William on the royal tour to Australia when he was just 9 months old, rather than leaving him at home as was customary. She chose his school herself, opting for a private school rather than sending him to boarding school at a very young age. She attended school events, sports days, and parent-teacher meetings. She was there for bedtime stories, for scraped knees, for laughter and tears. Diana was also determined to give William and Harry a sense of the world beyond palace walls. She took them to homeless shelters, to hospitals, to amusement parks, and to fast food restaurants. She wanted them to understand that not everyone lived in privilege, and she wanted them to develop empathy and compassion for others. One particularly memorable outing was when Diana took William and Harry to visit a shelter for the homeless. The boys, young and impressionable, met people who had lost everything: their homes, their jobs, their families. Diana talked to them about the circumstances that led to homelessness and encouraged them to treat everyone with dignity and respect. It was a lesson that stayed with both boys throughout their lives. Diana also took her sons to visit hospitals where children were suffering from serious illnesses. She wanted them to see that life wasn't always easy, that some people faced challenges that were unimaginable, and that kindness and compassion could make a difference. William and Harry watched their mother interact with these children, saw the way she held their hands and made them smile, and they learned from her example. But Diana also made sure her sons had fun. She took them to theme parks, where they rode roller coasters and ate cotton candy. She took them to the cinema to see the latest films. She played games with them at home, encouraging them to be silly and to enjoy their childhood. She wanted them to have memories of joy and laughter, not just duty and obligation. Diana's relationship with her sons was affectionate and open. She hugged them, kissed them, and told them she loved them. Simple gestures that meant the world. She also talked to them honestly, even about difficult subjects. As they grew older, she discussed her marriage with them, explaining in age-appropriate ways that she and their father were not happy together. She wanted them to understand, but she was careful never to speak badly of Charles. She knew that he was their father, and she wanted them to have a good relationship with him, even if her own relationship with him had broken down. William and Harry adored their mother. They saw her warmth, her kindness, and her vulnerability. They also saw the toll that public life took on her. As they grew older, they became protective of her, worried about the paparazzi, the media scrutiny, and the sadness they sometimes saw in her eyes. Diana, in turn, drew strength from her sons. They gave her a sense of purpose and reminded her of what was truly important. No matter how difficult things got, she had them, and they had her. Diana's charitable work was not just about attending events and shaking hands. She genuinely cared about the causes she supported. and she invested time and energy into understanding the issues and making a real difference. Her work with HIV/AIDS patients was groundbreaking. In the 1980s, AIDS was poorly understood and deeply stigmatized. People believed, incorrectly, that the disease could be transmitted through casual contact, and those who were infected faced discrimination, isolation, and fear. Many hospitals had separate wards for AIDS patients, and staff were often reluctant to treat them. Diana challenged these attitudes head-on. She visited AIDS wards, sat with patients, held their hands, and embraced them, all without gloves, at a time when many people wouldn't even shake hands with someone who had AIDS. Her actions sent a powerful message. People with AIDS deserved compassion, not fear. One of Diana's most famous visits was to the Middlesex Hospital in London in 1987. She was photographed shaking hands with an AIDS patient, and the image was printed in newspapers around the world. It was a simple gesture, but it had a profound impact. It helped to dispel myths about transmission and showed that people with AIDS were not to be feared or shunned. Diana also worked with organizations that supported homeless people. She was a patron of Centrepoint, a charity that provided shelter and support to young homeless individuals. Diana visited their facilities regularly, talking to the young people there, listening to their stories, and advocating for better resources and support. She had a particular empathy for those who were marginalized or misunderstood. She supported charities focused on addiction, mental health, domestic violence, and leprosy. She visited prisons, spoke with inmates, and advocated for rehabilitation and support, rather than just punishment. One cause that became especially important to Diana in her later years was the campaign to ban landmines. Landmines are weapons that remain active long after conflicts end, indiscriminately killing and maiming civilians, often children, who inadvertently trigger them. In January 1997, Diana travelled to Angola with the British Red Cross to see firsthand the impact of landmines. She walked through former minefields, wearing protective gear, and met with victims who had lost limbs. She visited hospitals and rehabilitation centres, and she spoke to families who had been devastated by these weapons. The images from that trip were powerful. Diana, wearing a protective visor, walking through a minefield, became a symbol of the campaign to ban landmines. Her willingness to put herself in that environment, to draw attention to the issue, was extraordinary. Diana's involvement wasn't just symbolic. She used her platform to lobby governments and to raise awareness on an international scale. She gave speeches, wrote articles, and met with political leaders to advocate for a ban on landmines. Just months later, in June 1997, Diana travelled to Bosnia with the Landmine Survivors Network. Again, she met with victims, visited hospitals, and continued her advocacy. The trip reinforced her commitment to the cause. Her efforts, along with those of many others, contributed to the signing of the Ottawa Treaty in December 1997, just months after her death. The treaty, officially known as the Mine Ban Treaty, prohibited the use, production, and stockpiling of anti-personnel landmines. While not all countries signed the treaty, it was a significant step forward, and Diana's advocacy played a crucial role in building momentum for the ban. Diana's charity work was driven by genuine compassion. She didn't just show up for photo opportunities. She engaged deeply, listened intently, and followed through on her commitments. She used her fame not for personal gain, but to shine a light on issues and people that society often ignored. One of the most fascinating aspects of Diana's life was the contrast between her public persona and her private struggles. To the world, she was radiant, confident, and composed. But in private, she was often anxious, insecure, and deeply unhappy. Diana was acutely aware of the image she projected. She knew how to smile for the cameras, how to engage with crowds, and how to present herself in the best possible light. But maintaining that facade was exhausting. She felt like she was constantly performing, always on, never able to truly relax or be herself. In private, Diana was warm and funny, with a mischievous sense of humor. She loved to laugh, to play pranks, and to let her guard down with people she trusted. She had close friendships with a number of people, some from her aristocratic background, others from entirely different worlds. She valued loyalty and discretion, and she cherished the relationships where she could be just Diana, not the Princess of Wales. But Diana also struggled with trust. She had been betrayed by people close to her, staff who sold stories to the tabloids, friends who shared confidences with journalists. She became cautious, sometimes paranoid, about who she could trust. She felt isolated, surrounded by people, but often profoundly alone. Diana sought therapy and alternative treatments to help manage her mental health. She worked with therapists, tried acupuncture, consulted astrologers, and explored various forms of spiritual healing. Some of these approaches helped, others didn't, but they reflected Diana's willingness to seek help and to try to understand herself better. She also turned to close friends for support. She confided in people like Rosa Monckton, a longtime friend who provided a listening ear and unwavering support. She spoke regularly with her butler, Paul Burrell, who became a confidant and a trusted figure in her household. And she maintained close relationships with her siblings, particularly her sisters, who understood the complexities of her life in ways that few others could. Diana's life was a balancing act, managing her public responsibilities, caring for her sons, dealing with her personal struggles, and trying to find some measure of happiness and fulfillment. It was a difficult, often overwhelming balancing act, and there were times when it all felt like too much. The Panorama interview in 1995 was a watershed moment, but it came with significant consequences. While the interview gave Diana a platform to tell her story, it also created new problems and tensions. The palace was furious. Diana had gone behind their backs, conducting the interview without their knowledge or approval. She had aired the family's dirty laundry on national television, and in doing so, she had damaged the institution of the monarchy. The Queen, who valued discretion and tradition above all else, was deeply disappointed. Charles, too, was angry and hurt. Diana had publicly questioned his fitness to be king, had admitted to her own affair, and had revealed intimate details of their marriage. The interview made it clear that any hope of reconciliation was gone. Their marriage was not just over, it was irreparably broken. The public's reaction to the interview was mixed. Many sympathized with Diana, seeing her as a woman who had been wronged and who was finally speaking her truth. Others felt she had gone too far, that she had been manipulative and self-serving. Some questioned her judgment, particularly her admission of adultery and her willingness to discuss such private matters publicly. The media had a field day. For weeks, newspapers and television programs dissected every word of the interview, analyzing Diana's motivations, her mental state, and the implications for the monarchy. Diana, who had hoped the interview would give her control over her narrative, found herself once again at the mercy of the press. One of the most troubling aspects of the Panorama interview was how it was obtained. It later emerged that journalist Martin Bashir had used deceptive tactics to secure the interview. He had shown Diana's brother, Earl Spencer, forged bank statements suggesting that members of Diana's staff were being paid by the security services to spy on her. These forgeries played on Diana's existing fears and paranoia, and they helped convince her to do the interview. An investigation decades later found that Bashir had acted unethically and that the BBC had failed in its duty to properly investigate the circumstances surrounding the interview. The revelation was deeply troubling and raised questions about whether Diana had been manipulated at a vulnerable time in her life. William and Harry, looking back on the interview as adults, expressed anger and sadness about how their mother had been treated. They felt she had been exploited, and they criticized the BBC for its failures. The interview, they said, had contributed to their mother's sense of isolation and had made her final years more difficult. Despite the controversy, the Panorama interview achieved one of Diana's goals. It made clear that her marriage to Charles was over and that a divorce was inevitable. The Queen's letter to both Charles and Diana, urging them to divorce, came shortly after the interview aired. The divorce negotiations were complex and at times contentious. Diana's status, her title, her role, and her financial settlement all had to be determined. There were concerns about precedent, about how a divorced Princess of Wales would fit into the royal structure, and about what kind of access Diana would have to her sons. One of the most significant issues was Diana's title. Upon marriage, she had become Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales. After the divorce, she would lose the Her Royal Highness designation and would be known simply as Diana, Princess of Wales. It was a symbolic demotion, and for Diana, it stung. She understood the practicalities. If she remarried, she couldn't remain an HRH, but it still felt like a rejection, another way in which the royal family was distancing itself from her. Diana received a substantial financial settlement, estimated at around $17 million, plus a lump sum for her private office. She retained her apartment at Kensington Palace and was allowed to continue using royal transportation when conducting official business. Most importantly, Diana was given assurances about her role in William and Harry's lives. She would remain deeply involved in their upbringing, and decisions about their education and welfare would be made jointly with Charles. Diana was determined that the divorce would not diminish her relationship with her sons, and on this point, she was unwavering. When the divorce was finalized in August 1996, Diana felt a sense of relief. The uncertainty was over. She was no longer bound to a marriage that had made her miserable. She was free to live her life on her own terms. But freedom came with challenges. Diana had to redefine her role. She was no longer a working member of the royal family, which meant she had to be selective about the public engagements she took on. She retained her patronage of several charities, but gave up others. She wanted to focus her energy on the causes that mattered most to her: HIV/AIDS, homelessness, and landmines. Diana also had to navigate her personal life without the structure and protection of the royal family. She was still hounded by the paparazzi, still the subject of endless media speculation. But now she didn't have the palace's press office to manage the narrative or to push back against false stories. Despite these challenges, Diana embraced her newfound independence. She traveled. She spent time with friends. She pursued her interests. She seemed lighter, happier, more at ease. Those who knew her during this period said she was more confident, more comfortable in her own skin. She also began to think about what came next. Diana was still young, just 35 years old when the divorce was finalized, and she had decades of life ahead of her. She talked about wanting to live abroad, perhaps in America, where she could have more privacy. She talked about continuing her humanitarian work, maybe even taking on a formal role with an international organization. She dreamed of a life where she could make a difference without the constraints of royal protocol. After her separation and divorce, Diana's romantic life became a subject of intense public fascination. The press followed her every move, speculating about potential relationships and publishing photographs of Diana with various men. Diana dated several men during this period, though she was always cautious, aware that any relationship would be scrutinized and sensationalized. One of her most significant relationships was with Dr. Hasnat Khan, a British-Pakistani heart surgeon. Diana met Hasnat Khan in 1995, and they quickly developed a deep connection. Khan was intelligent, compassionate, and unpretentious, qualities that Diana found deeply attractive. He had no interest in fame or publicity, and he treated Diana as a woman, not as a princess. For Diana, this was refreshing. She could be herself with him, without the pressure of royal expectations. The relationship was kept as private as possible. Diana would visit Khan at his hospital, often late at night, and they would spend time together away from the prying eyes of the press. Diana even traveled to Pakistan to meet his family, a sign of how serious she was about the relationship. Diana reportedly hoped to marry Khan. She saw in him a potential partner, someone with whom she could build a life beyond the royal family. But Khan was reluctant. He was a private person, and he was uncomfortable with the level of media attention that came with being associated with Diana. He also worried about how his career and his family would be affected. The relationship eventually ended in 1997, and Diana was heartbroken. She had genuinely cared for Khan, and the breakup left her feeling sad and once again alone. It was shortly after her relationship with Khan ended that Diana began seeing Dodi Fayed. The relationship was new, and it's unclear how serious it might have become had Diana lived. Some believed that Diana and Dodi were deeply in love and that an engagement was imminent. Others, including some of Diana's close friends, felt that the relationship was more of a rebound, a way for Diana to move on from the pain of her breakup with Khan. What is clear is that Diana seemed happy during her time with Dodi. She smiled, she laughed, and she allowed herself to enjoy the moment. Whether it would have lasted, we will never know. The summer of 1997 was, in many ways, a time of transition for Diana. She was adjusting to her post-divorce life, exploring new relationships, and continuing her humanitarian work. She seemed to be finding her footing, figuring out who she was and what she wanted. In July, Diana accepted an invitation from Mohammed Al Fayed to vacation with his family in the south of France. William and Harry joined her for part of the trip, enjoying time on Al Fayed's yacht and relaxing in the sun. It was during this vacation that Diana and Dodi Fayed's relationship became romantic. After William and Harry returned to their father, Diana and Dodi continued to see each other. They traveled to Paris, to the Mediterranean, and to other destinations, always followed by the paparazzi. The press was fascinated by this new romance, and photographs of Diana and Dodi were splashed across tabloids around the world. Diana, despite the media attention, seemed content. She was enjoying herself, living in the moment, and not worrying too much about the future. She was also looking forward to the autumn, when she planned to focus more on her charity work and to spend time with her sons. But fate, as we know, had other plans. The hours and days following Diana's death were chaotic and surreal. In Paris, investigators began the process of piecing together what had happened. The wreckage of the Mercedes was examined, witnesses were interviewed, and the paparazzi who had been following Diana were questioned. In Britain, the news spread rapidly. People woke up to headlines announcing Diana's death, and the reaction was one of shock and disbelief. Many refused to believe it at first, thinking it must be a mistake or a hoax. But as the day wore on and official statements were released, the reality set in. The public's grief was immediate and profound. Spontaneous memorials sprang up across the country. People gathered outside Kensington Palace, Buckingham Palace, and St. James's Palace, bringing flowers, cards, and candles. Strangers hugged each other, cried together, and shared memories of Diana. The outpouring of emotion was unlike anything Britain had seen before. The intensity of the public mourning took many by surprise, including the royal family and the government. Diana had been beloved, certainly, but the depth of the grief and the scale of the public response were extraordinary. It was as if the nation had lost a family member, and the pain was palpable. In the days leading up to the funeral, the focus shifted to how Diana would be honored. There were debates about protocol, about whether the funeral should be a private family affair or a public event. In the end, it was decided that Diana deserved a funeral befitting her status and her impact, and plans were made for a ceremony at Westminster Abbey. The royal family faced criticism during this period for their perceived lack of emotion. The Queen's decision to remain at Balmoral, while intended to protect William and Harry, was seen by some as cold and out of touch. The absence of a flag at half-mast at Buckingham Palace became a symbol of the disconnect between the monarchy and the public. Eventually, as mentioned earlier, the Queen returned to London, addressed the nation, and acknowledged the public's grief. Her speech helped to ease some of the tension, but the week between Diana's death and her funeral remained a difficult and emotionally charged time for Britain. Diana's death forced the British monarchy to confront its relevance and its relationship with the public. The intense criticism the royal family faced in the days after Diana's death was a wake-up call. It became clear that the old ways, the stiff formality, the emotional distance, the rigid adherence to protocol, were no longer acceptable to a modern public. In the years since Diana's death, the monarchy has evolved. There's been a greater emphasis on accessibility, on emotional openness, and on engaging with social issues. The younger generation of royals, William, Kate, and Harry, before his departure from royal duties, have embraced a more informal, relatable approach to their roles. William, in particular, has carried forward his mother's legacy. He has been open about his own struggles with grief and mental health, and he has championed causes related to mental health awareness, homelessness, and conservation. He approaches his role with a sense of duty, but also with the warmth and compassion he learned from his mother. Kate, the Duchess of Cambridge, now Princess of Wales, has also drawn inspiration from Diana. She has taken on patronages related to children, mental health, and addiction, and she has been praised for her hands-on approach and her genuine engagement with the people she meets. Harry, before stepping back from royal duties, was perhaps the most vocal about his mother's influence. He spoke openly about the trauma of losing her, the impact it had on his mental health, and his determination to continue her humanitarian work. His charity work, particularly with wounded veterans and mental health initiatives, reflected Diana's values. Diana changed the monarchy by showing that royals could be human. They could show emotion, they could engage with difficult issues, and they could connect with people in meaningful ways. Her legacy is visible in the way the royal family operates today. In the years following Diana's death, numerous conspiracy theories emerged, fueled by the circumstances of the crash, the involvement of the paparazzi, and the high-profile nature of the individuals involved. Mohammed Al-Fayed, Dodi's father, was the most vocal proponent of the theory that Diana and Dodi were murdered. He claimed that the British establishment, uncomfortable with Diana's relationship with his son and concerned about her influence, orchestrated the crash. He suggested that the royal family, the security services, and even Prince Philip were involved in a plot to kill Diana. Al-Fayed's claims were taken seriously enough to warrant multiple investigations. In France, a lengthy investigation concluded that the crash was an accident caused by Henri Paul's intoxication, excessive speed, and the failure of Diana and Dodi to wear seatbelts. In the UK, an inquest was held from 2007 to 2008, known as Operation Paget. The inquest examined numerous conspiracy theories and allegations, including claims that the paparazzi had deliberately caused the crash. Henri Paul was working for the security services. Diana had been pregnant with Dodi's child and was killed to prevent her from marrying him. The royal family had ordered the assassination. The The inquest, which heard from hundreds of witnesses and examined thousands of documents, found no evidence to support any of these theories. The jury concluded that Diana and Dodi were unlawfully killed due to the gross negligence of Henri Paul and the pursuing paparazzi. Despite these official findings, some people continue to believe that Diana was murdered. The conspiracy theories persist, fueled in part by distrust of authority and a desire to find meaning in a senseless tragedy. For William and Harry, the conspiracy theories have been a source of pain. They have stated that they accept the official findings and that they believe their mother's death was a tragic accident. The endless speculation and conspiracy theories, they have said, prevent them and the public from moving on and honouring Diana's memory in a meaningful way. Diana's death was not just a British tragedy, it was a global one. Around the world, people mourned the loss of a woman who had touched their lives, even if only from afar. In the United States, Diana had been enormously popular. Americans admired her style, her grace, and her humanitarian work. News of her death dominated the media, and tributes poured in from political leaders, celebrities, and ordinary citizens. President Bill Clinton and First Lady Hillary Clinton expressed their condolences, and flags were flown at half-mast at American government buildings. In France, where the tragedy occurred, there was a sense of shock and sadness. Parisians left flowers at the entrance to the tunnel where Diana died, and the French government expressed its sorrow and solidarity with Britain. In countries around the world, from Australia to Canada, from India to South Africa, people mourned Diana. She had visited many of these countries during her lifetime, and people remembered her warmth, her kindness, and her genuine interest in their lives and their challenges. Diana's death also prompted a broader conversation about celebrity culture, the paparazzi, and the media's role in the tragedy. Many blamed the photographers who had chased Diana through the streets of Paris, and there were calls for stricter regulations on the press and greater protections for public figures. In the months and years following her death, media outlets and journalists engaged in soul-searching about their responsibility. Some newspapers and magazines pledged to be more ethical in their coverage of celebrities, though the rise of the internet and social media has made such promises difficult to uphold. In the years since Diana's death, numerous memorials and tributes have been created to honour her memory. In London, the Diana, Princess of Wales Memorial Fountain was opened in Hyde Park in 2004. The fountain, designed to reflect Diana's openness and accessibility, is a ring of flowing water that visitors can walk around and even wade in. It has become a popular spot for reflection and remembrance. The Diana Memorial Playground, also in Kensington Gardens, was created as a tribute to Diana's love of children. The playground features a large wooden pirate ship and is designed to encourage imaginative play, reflecting Diana's belief that childhood should be a time of joy and creativity. At Althorpe, Diana's childhood home and final resting place, a museum has been established that includes exhibits about her life, her charity work, and her legacy. Visitors can walk through the grounds and pay their respects at the island where Diana is buried, though the island itself is not accessible to the public. Around the world, streets, buildings, and charitable organizations have been named in Diana's honor. The Diana Award, as mentioned earlier, recognizes young people who embody Diana's values. Hospitals, schools, and community centers bear her name, ensuring that her legacy lives on. In popular culture, Diana continues to be a subject of fascination. Numerous books, documentaries, films, and even a musical have been created about her life. Some of these portrayals have been sympathetic and respectful, while others have been criticized for sensationalizing her story or focusing too much on her struggles rather than her achievements. The fourth season of the Netflix series, The Crown, which dramatized Diana's entry into the royal family and her troubled marriage, reignited public interest in her story. The portrayal sparked debate about accuracy, privacy, and the ethics of dramatizing the lives of real people, particularly those who are no longer able to tell their own stories. For William and Harry, their mother's legacy is deeply personal. They were just boys when she died, and they have spent their adult lives grappling with her loss while also working to honor her memory. In 2007, on the 10th anniversary of Diana's death, William and Harry organized a concert at Wembley Stadium to celebrate their mother's life. The concert for Diana featured performances by Elton John, Duran Duran, and many other artists, and it raised money for charities that Diana had supported. The event was a joyful celebration, a departure from the somber memorials of the past, and it reflected William and Harry's desire to remember their mother for the joy she brought, not just the tragedy of her death. Both princes have spoken publicly about their mother on numerous occasions. In interviews marking the 20th anniversary of her death in 2017, William and Harry opened up about their grief, their regrets, and their ongoing love for Diana. William spoke about the difficulty of losing his mother at such a young age, and the sense of duty he felt to carry on her work. He described Diana as a loving, devoted mother who always put him and Harry first. He also spoke about his own experiences of fatherhood and how becoming a parent had given him a new appreciation for what his mother had done for him. Harry was even more candid, discussing the impact of Diana's death on his mental health. He revealed that he had struggled with anger, grief, and a sense of hopelessness for many years. He admitted that he had avoided dealing with his emotions and that it had taken him nearly 2 decades to seek help and begin processing his loss. Harry has also been vocal about the role of the media in his mother's death and in his own struggles. He has criticized the press for its invasive coverage and has drawn parallels between the way his mother was treated and the way his wife, Meghan Markle, was treated. Harry's decision to step back from royal duties and to speak out against the media was, in part, motivated by a desire to protect his own family from the same fate his mother suffered. Both William and Harry have worked to continue Diana's charitable legacy. They have supported causes related to mental health, homelessness, HIV/AIDS, and many other issues that Diana cared about. They have used their platforms to raise awareness and to advocate for change, just as their mother did. In many ways, William and Harry are Diana's greatest legacy. They are compassionate, empathetic, and committed to making a difference. They carry with them the lessons she taught them, and they honor her memory through their actions. Diana's impact extended far beyond her charitable work and her role in the royal family. She was a cultural phenomenon, a figure who transcended her time and place and became a global icon. Diana represented different things to different people. To some, she was a fairy tale princess, a beautiful, glamorous figure who seemed to live a life of luxury and privilege. To others, she was a victim, a woman trapped in an unhappy marriage, mistreated by the royal family and hounded by the press. To still others, she was a survivor, a woman who found her strength, spoke her truth, and used her platform to make the world a better place. Diana's story resonated because it was, in many ways, deeply human. She experienced love and loss, joy and pain, triumph and tragedy. She made mistakes, struggled with insecurity, and sometimes acted in ways that were contradictory or confusing. But she was also kind, compassionate, and brave. She was complicated, just like all of us, and that complexity made her relatable. Diana also changed the way we think about royalty. Before Diana, the British royal family was seen as distant and untouchable, a symbol of tradition and continuity. Diana made them human. She showed that even princesses could be unhappy, could struggle, and could rebel against the expectations placed upon them. She broke the mold, and in doing so, she forced the monarchy to evolve. Diana's influence on celebrity culture is also significant. She was one of the first true global celebrities, someone whose every move was documented and whose image was instantly recognizable around the world. The intense media scrutiny she faced, the paparazzi culture, and the public's insatiable appetite for information about her life all foreshadowed the way celebrity culture would develop in the years to come. The circumstances of Diana's death also sparked important conversations about the ethics of journalism, the boundaries of privacy, and the responsibility of the media. While those conversations continue, Diana's death remains a cautionary tale about the dangers of fame and the cost of living in the public eye. As we approach the end of this journey through Diana's life, it's worth taking a moment to reflect on who she was and what she represented. Diana was not perfect. She made mistakes. She could be impulsive, emotional, and at times manipulative. She struggled with mental health issues, engaged in behaviors that were destructive, and sometimes made decisions that were questionable. She was human, with all the flaws and contradictions that come with being human. But Diana was also extraordinary. She had a capacity for empathy that was rare and genuine. She cared about people, not in an abstract, theoretical way, but in a real, tangible way. She saw suffering and she responded to it. She used her privilege and her platform not for personal gain, but to help others. Diana's life was defined by dualities. She was both privileged and oppressed, both powerful and vulnerable, both public and deeply private. She navigated these dualities with varying degrees of success, but always with a determination to remain true to herself. Perhaps what made Diana so compelling was her authenticity. In a world where public figures are often carefully managed and controlled, Diana was refreshingly real. She laughed, she cried, she admitted her flaws, and she refused to pretend that everything was fine when it wasn't. She was honest, sometimes brutally so, and that honesty endeared her to people. Diana's story is also a reminder of the cost of fame. She lived her entire adult life under a microscope, scrutinized and judged at every turn. The pressures of that existence took a toll on her mental health, her relationships, and ultimately, her life. Her death was a wake-up call, a reminder that public figures are not commodities to be consumed, but human beings deserving of dignity and privacy. And so, dear listener, we come to the end of our journey through the life of Diana, Princess of Wales. We have travelled together through her childhood, her marriage, her struggles, her triumphs, and her tragic death. We have explored the complexity of her character, the depth of her compassion, and the lasting impact of her legacy. Diana's life was, in many ways, a modern fairy tale, but not the kind that ends with happily ever after. It was a story of love and loss, of hope and heartbreak, of a woman who sought to find her place in the world and to make a difference in the lives of others. She succeeded in ways she could never have imagined. Diana touched millions of lives, not through grand gestures or sweeping declarations, but through simple acts of kindness and compassion. She held the hands of the dying, she hugged the marginalized, and she spoke up for those who had no voice. Diana's legacy is not confined to history books or museum exhibits. It lives on in the work of the charities she supported, in the causes she championed, and in the hearts of those who were inspired by her example. It lives on in her sons, who carry her values forward and who work every day to honor her memory. And Diana's legacy lives on in each of us, whenever we choose kindness over indifference, compassion over judgment, and empathy over apathy. She showed us that one person, no matter how flawed or troubled, can make a difference. She showed us that what matters most is not how we are remembered for our titles or our accomplishments, but for the love we give and the lives we touch. As you drift off to sleep tonight, may you carry with you the spirit of Diana, a reminder to be kind, to be brave, and to see the humanity in everyone you meet. May you find peace in knowing that even in the darkest moments, there is always light, always hope, and always the possibility of making the world a little bit better. Rest well, dear listener, and may your dreams be filled with the warmth, compassion, and grace that Diana brought into this world. Good night.